Geralt has arrived in Night City with this blade and knife build that one-shots enemies with knives from range and slices them to pieces in melee range with his sword. Let's go through my Bladerunner build for Cyberpunk 2077. Let's go! Let me know in the comments if you're Team Triss or Team Yen. So the general build here is like Geralt themed, but it's not necessarily Geralt, right? It's basically just a Bladerunner that I wanted to theme in that way, especially now that we have his outfit, or not his outfit, but an Geralt outfit added to the game with the Wild Hunt jacket, plus the Gwynbleidd, his sword, which is actually a really good sword. So the sword itself does additional damage against bosses, and after killing enemies in rapid succession, all attacks are temporarily guaranteed critical hits, and the effect refreshes after quickly killing other enemies. And so essentially here, even with low health as well, it becomes guaranteed hits, but it gives you a ton of critical hit damage and just constant critical hits. It's actually a really good sword in its own right, and it is Geralt's sword, so I just decided to theme this build around that. Alternatively, for some ranged options, we're using knives here. Now you can use any sort of knife. I'm using the Stinger in this build because it links well with being the bleeding damage from blades as well as the poison damage, which we'll get into why that's important in a little bit. But essentially you just want to use any knife here that you can throw at targets and land that headshot to instant kill them, and then you'll immediately get that knife back because of the perk points that we have chosen. You can use guns here, but we're not really using any in this build, like because you've got both reflexes and cool. If you wanted to go that route, you could, but I wanted to make a build that solely focuses on these cool new blade perks, as well as how much fun it is to just throw knives at people's faces, and so that's why we're doing that. For the cyberdeck, I am using berserk here because of the extra attack speed and the reduction to stamina cost that you do gain from it. But essentially this build has a great flow because you've got two weapons that you use. You use the sword for melee, you use the knife for range, and you can use the mantis blades as an alternative option. But one thing that really irritates me that I'm disappointed they didn't fix in update 2.0 is that to switch to your like mantis blades or any of those arm attachments, you have to actually bring up the weapon wheel. You can't just like use any sort of shortcuts, hotkeys. It's just a minor thing. I'm curious if that bothers anyone else. Like, let me know in the comments. But that's why I also prefer to use, say, the projectile launch system in previous builds, or like using swords in this build, because you can get that flow between switching from the sword to the knife and vice versa without having to bring up the weapon wheel. Anyway, thank you for coming to my TED Talk, but let's break down this build starting with attributes. For your attributes, you first want to level out your reflexes to gain those blade perks, because we can just use any sort of katana as you're leveling out. You don't have to use mantis blades. And then going into the cool line to start getting some of those perks if you want to go into the knife and the throwables, but I wouldn't ignore body because of the HP increases you get from that. But you will have more HP because you won't be going into Edgerunner until later on, so definitely go reflexes to get your 20 to first, and then cool to 20, and then body to 17-ish or as high as you can go there, and then max out your technical ability so you can get those chrome perks to then get all of your cyberware capacity up. For your perks, we will start with the reflexes line. Now you definitely want to pick up the dashing perks here just so you can move around quickly, because we are only using melee attacks in this build, right? So the faster you can get into combat, the better. But the main reason we're picking up reflexes is because of the blade skills. Like, all of these are in here, and with 2.0 all the blade skills will actually benefit from your mantis blades as well. They are all linked now too. So the main thing that you want to pick up here is definitely all of these. So you're obviously going to get lead and steel so you can block the projectiles, but then grabbing bullet deflect so you can deflect it back in the targets is good as well. The Bladerunner finishes is great because it restores your health, and any kind of health regen you can get back is definitely beneficial, increasing, say, the finisher range as well as opportunist, so you can do it, as well as the flash of steel to increase your movement speed and attack speed after finishes are all beneficial to grab as well. I am a big fan of Slaughterhouse too, so once you max this out, all attacks, counterattacks, and deflected bullets apply bleeding, which increases dismemberment chance, and every time you dismember an enemy, you get stamina back, which is great for when you're thinking about actually using that bullet deflect, because every time you deflect, you will lose stamina. You can regen stamina while still deflecting by, say, jumping in the air and dashing, because you can get stamina back with Tailwind, but anytime you can avoid damage by that way in a build like this is very beneficial. Flash and Thunderclap is an interesting one because I don't really see this actually trigger that much where you get like that fast leap happen. It seems to not always trigger. I'm not really sure exactly why, if it's like bugged or something, but you will often just like dash to the enemy and then attack rather than using flash and thunderclap. But if it works for you, it works for you. But you can obviously, in the relic line, right, you've got the mantis blade here, which is basically like the mantis blade version of that attack. Now, in the technical ability line, we're really just grabbing the Cyberware perks here. You want to grab all of them from all of the ones in the lower tier, plus the license to Chrome. We'll grab Extended Warranty and Cyborg, but you don't really need Ambidextrous or Built Different here. They're just sort of wasted perk slots. So we're not really using hands for anything other than the one specific slot we're using, plus Built Different we're not using, but grab Edge Runner here because the Fury state you get when this is triggered is absolutely amazing. So you get that extra 10% damage, plus the crit chance and crit damage, which is perfect for the build we have set up here. And we're just grabbing a couple of these specifically for like health regen items because you can use some of that. In the body line here, this is all about health regen. So Painkiller plus its secondaries and Adrenaline Rush for the extra health regen, and the Adrenaline Rush mode. The Adrenaline Rush mode is when you use a blood pump or a healing item, you'll get that orange like overheal on your health bar, and we're buffing this with the secondaries, but the main one here is Juggernaut for the extra movement speed and damage. The movement speed obviously so you can get nice and close to enemies, and the damage is pretty self-explanatory why we want more damage. In the cool line here, we are grabbing the throwable weapons perks like Scorpion Sting and the Juggler. The Juggler is great because it gives you that instant cooldown reset when you neutralize an enemy by hitting them in the head. So essentially here, you'll one-shot most enemies when you headshot them and then immediately get that throwable back so you don't have to wait for that cooldown. Style over substance is great as well to guarantee your critical hits when you are sliding around and dashing and that sort of a thing. So in order to grab this, you do need to grab ninjutsu as well as feline footwork, like these stealth orientated perks, which, I mean, you can use stealth in this build. It does work with the throwable weapons because they're obviously silent, and just like one-shotting enemies, they're not really going to notice you when they're dead. So it sort of works out that way. But for the most part, we're not really using it for that. We're using it necessarily for the amount of damage it does, plus giving us that ranged option and the general flow of, say, using these throwables and then using the daggers. I would be picking up all of the secondaries here as well, especially Parasite, so when crit hits and headshots you get health back. Neurotoxin is great for if you don't actually one-shot enemies, it blinds them or disables their sprinting, so it sort of locks them in place in some regards. Strong attacks and thrown weapons used against poison enemies instantly deal substantial poison damage and then remove poison effects is not that great because you do want to keep the poison effect on enemies in most cases, because the reason we want to keep that poison effect on is because of our Black Mamba perk here, right? So with the Cyberware, once you've got Black Mamba, you probably don't want that perk because against poison enemies, so when they're poisoned, they take less poison damage, but they take 18% damage from everything else. So I would only be grabbing that perk if you don't necessarily have that Cyberware yet, but once you have got that, you can switch that out, but otherwise you've got the option there. And obviously grab Corrosion so you can apply poison to mechs, robots, drones, and turrets because everyone can share in the poison love. Cyberware isn't the main focus of this build, but there's definitely some critical ones to pick up. Now, we have already touched on that we are using Berserk, and I'm using the Militech Berserk here because when it's activated, it makes you completely invulnerable to damage. The downside here is that you can't use items while it's active, so if you want to instead use something else that allows you to, say, heal while you do have this active, you can, but I'm using this because you get that 30% extra attack speed, no stamina cost, the extra movement speed, plus the extra damage when you trigger this when you are at low health, and then you gain health for every enemy that you have neutralized while it's active. You can also grab Axetol here once you have unlocked this. I believe this comes from Regina's quest. Like once you've got all of the Cyber Psychos, you will unlock this, which will then reduce the cooldowns for, say, your Berserk, and also it gives me melee damage, which is fantastic. For Mantis Blades, I am using the Toxic variant here because applying that poison chance will then trigger the other effects that we have here, right? So once poison is on the enemy, it will then trigger Black Mamba in the circulatory system, so you gain additional damage, but you lose that poison damage. And that 18% damage just across the board is probably better than just that poison tick, so that's why we're going with that route. In the skeleton line, you're really just grabbing like armor here, but the dense marrow is an absolute must. Even though it increases your melee stamina cost, 27% extra melee damage you cannot sneeze at. Down in the nervous system line, the main one to grab here is Stabber to increase your crit chance with blades and throwable weapons, as that is the main focus of this build, is blades and throwable weapons. In everything else, really, we're just focusing on mitigation chance and armor, right? So counter shell as well as the subdermal armor. There's nothing specific to call out here, and we've sort of touched on all the main ones. The hand is the big one to grab for handle wrap. So when equipping or throwing a throwable weapon, you have 23% crit chance with throwable weapons for 6 seconds. So when you say are using like the Gwynbleidd here, like Geralt's sword, and then you immediately switch to the blades, you have that extra crit chance to be able to deal those attacks. For weapons, we have already touched on what we're using here, but just again, we are using the Gwynbleidd, which is the bonus you get for update 2.0. You can just use any katana you like, right? There is some great katanas in this game, like Byakko, which you get from completing Wakako's gigs. They'll give you this, which is a similar variant to Gwynbleidd, that you will gain additional attack speed when you kill enemies, like at fast succession, so you can attack faster, whereas the Gwynbleidd's sort of more about the critical hits. But both of these are fantastic, and there's plenty of other katanas that you could run. As mentioned, I am using Stinger, and this gives you an additional, say if a target is poison, it'll automatically apply bleeding, and then if they're bleeding, it automatically applies poison. You will get this by completing the I'll Fly Away quest, which is a side job from Mitch after you have initiated the quest with the Aldecados in the Badlands, but there's plenty of other like knives that you can use as well. This is just the option that I have chosen to go with. We've already touched on the Mantis Blades and why we're using those specific ones, but it is because when you apply that poison chance, you can trigger the effects of Black Mamba to increase the damage. So if you're using the Mantis Blades, you'll automatically trigger the poison rather than having to say switch to the knife and headshot those tough enemies and then switch back to the sword to then get the benefits from it. A couple of quick tips to finish this out. One main one is that there are many ways you can restore your stamina, like double jumping and dashing. So if you're using, say, your block to deflect projectiles and just prevent damage from coming towards you, like if you're in sort of a tricky situation, you can then say double jump or dash backwards while in the air to keep that block active and keep restoring your stamina so that it doesn't actually end. Berserk is just fantastic as a lifesaver. Now, you don't necessarily have to use the Berserk that I'm using. You can use a cheaper one, or say when you're leveling, like just get whichever one that you can get. But the main reason I'm using this one is because you can trigger it while your health is low and get those additional benefits from it, and then increase all of your damage by having it active at that time. And it does last a really solid amount of time with all the benefits we have, and the cooldown is really short, so it's not too much of an issue. Like you can then just pop your health healing items like once it has ended. But that is the Geralt build, guys. Let me know your thoughts on this Bladerunner build in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.